Welcome to another episode of the Business of Higher Ed podcast. My name is David Fox. I am your host. Immigration and post-secondary education in Canada has undergone sweeping, I don't even know if sweeping is enough to describe it, reforms starting about a year ago, just about a year ago. And the impact of those reforms has been dramatic. We are not unexpectedly hearing from a number of institutions of different types in different places throughout Canada about what this really means in terms of sustainability, in terms of programming, in terms of competitiveness. We haven't yet actually felt the full impact of these changes. That is yet to come. So stay tuned. So to talk about this, because it is absolutely central to the business of higher ed, I'm really pleased to welcome Matthew McDonald. Now, Matthew is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. He has lived throughout Canada and the world. And so he has personal knowledge and experience with the opportunities, but also the challenges of negotiating the myriad immigration laws and the practical application of those laws, not only in Canada, but in other countries. He offers a view and an empathy, I might say, with his clients as to how these laws can be really challenging. As I said, it's been about a year. January 28th was when we.
That was when the first big announcement about the study permit caps came in. So I think it shook the sector in Canada and really started off what we could call the big year of change in Canadian immigration, especially as it pertains to international students and the impact on colleges and universities. Yes.
Can you give us a general picture of where are we right now with respect to international education, student visas in Canada?
Sure. I'll describe it really in terms of what the federal government is really trying to emphasize through a lot of the changes. I would say overall, the federal government has, through its policies, indicated its priorities. It has prioritized the university sector over the college sector. And we see that in the way that it has created restrictions on eligibility for post-graduation work permits. And so along with that, Mark Miller, who is, even though he's the federal minister of immigration, he is sometimes referred to as the de facto or wannabe minister of education, in that all of his changes are revising the post-secondary sector that is significantly reliant on international student tuition revenue. And so some of the policy changes around post-graduation work permits, the access to the Canadian labor market, that is one of the appeals for international students studying in Canada, that's becoming restricted. So you have to be a university grad to access, to get a post-graduation work permit, or if you're going to a college or a polytechnic, you have to be graduating from a program that aligns with one of Canada's quote-unquote long-term labor shortages. And so these, by no surprise, align very closely with the occupational priorities within Canada's immigration system. So we're seeing that for science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM, healthcare, and skilled trades. So
agriculture.
And agriculture is there as well. So we really see the way the federal government is changing policy to say to international students, if you want to work in Canada after graduation, if you want to pursue permanent residence, well, you need to go to a university or study in one of the areas that we tell you is important. And so that is having a huge change to the enrollment patterns in colleges and universities in the country. And the ongoing changes that we're seeing policy updates, sometimes feels like they are weekly, that are hard to keep track of. Canada's brand on the global stage is, I think, one of chaos. We've traditionally been known as a country of stability, peace, and order. And our current immigration minister has completely flipped that and really undone a reputation of Canada as a place that of predictability and stability in one quick year. So I think that is also having a significant impact on enrollment, that a lot of people just don't trust that Canada is a place that they can invest in their education and their future. So that's why we're seeing a lot. So we're seeing an impact on budgets of colleges and polytechnics
Yeah.
because of enrollment, because of the restrictions on capstone students, post-graduation work permit eligibility, but also just this overall instability is at least in the short term impacting all institutions.
What can we say that you're seeing, and you've alluded to it, you're seeing in terms of the specific types of examples of impacts on colleges, impacts on student populations? You talked about enrollment patterns. Can you speak a little bit more about really on the ground? These are some examples of what we're seeing.
Yeah, so I'll clarify with my clients. So I used to work in the sector. I used to work in the college and university sector. I spent over a decade working on the inside in Toronto before I went private with my own firm. So I've been independent for slightly over a year now. Most of my clients are actually former international students, and
Mm.
I really identified this gap because colleges and universities do not provide support for helping international student graduates transition to permanent residence. It's outside of their scope. I knew there was a need out there, and so my work really, I do a lot. I specialize in helping international students strategize and pursue permanent residence in Canada. So I'm seeing, even I do take a very small number of clients who need help applying for a study permit from outside Canada. I have a number of clients in West Africa, for example, who do very much want to come study in Canada as part of a two-step immigration process. First study, then work and stay. And this is a process that was designed by the Canadian government, that was marketed by the Canadian government, certainly marketed by post-secondary institutions as well, the opportunity to pursue permanent residence. And so they are actually, I see people changing their program of study to try to align with what will help them get a post-graduation work permit and the chance of pursuing permanent residency in Canada. So it is having the impact on potential international students in changing their program of study. And so this is, I think, one of the, I don't know if it's one of the questions that I think about is what the value of education is, and
Mm.
it's increasingly becoming less about education and more. So the federal government sees colleges and universities as a labor market tool for new immigrants. I think the international student program was developed in many ways because colleges and universities were seen as a place to help settle newcomers rather than having people arrive at age 35 and struggle to enter the workforce. Hey, smarter idea, make them pay for it in their 20s, build a community, build a network, get a job, and then become permanent residents, and they pay for their settlement services themselves. So this is the model that the college and university system has been brought into the immigration system, especially as provincial governments have decided that they don't want to fund colleges and universities anymore. So we've created this system in Canada where our post-secondary system is funded by international students, and it is the whole. If there wasn't an immigration pathway, I think we would have seen these financial challenges in our colleges and universities many years ago.
What does this mean? We are a very large country. We have a lot of institutions in some provinces, fewer in others. Um, in terms of sort of geographic impacts, can you give us any insights on sort of the impact geographically for schools?
Absolutely. I think part of, if when you think about immigration in Canada, there's like the Toronto-Vancouver conversation, and then there's everywhere else. And I
Mm.
think part of what was happening here is I think there was a lot of pressure mounting on very significant international student enrollment in the Greater Toronto Area in Southern Ontario. That where a lot of communities were calling out and saying that this kind of influx of growth we cannot handle. We saw it, for example, in with Conestoga is the best known example, I think. Just the community said this isn't, we can't handle all these people. So and then in the Greater Toronto Area too. So I think part of the changes was an attempt to address this rapid growth that was happening in Southern Ontario, but as many have used the phrase, the Minister of Immigration, Mark Miller, used a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel. And I think one of the big problems with the policy is that in trying to address one problem, the Trudeau Liberals have created a host of other problems because we are a vast and diverse country. I'm from rural Manitoba, and I know how challenging it is to get someone to immigrate to rural Manitoba. My home village is depopulating, and is crying to get more people, more investment. They want immigration can be part of a rural development strategy. It's a huge part of economic development for rural areas. And there's great programs. There's pilot projects to help bringing in more newcomers and helping them stay in the rural areas. And one way is through colleges that do work in, Brandon, Manitoba is where I actually went to university, but there's a college there too.
Yeah.
Community college. I know I talked to people who work in smaller towns in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, where I'm just like in Northern Ontario, where it's hard to convince someone from the other side of the world to move outside of a city. To a place that's unknown, to think about building a life, especially if it's even colder than Toronto or Vancouver. It's really hard.
Isn't that cold?
In the first place. Manitoba, especially.
Manitoba.
And so the problem with the policy is, I think again the kind of the sledgehammer to destroy Brand Canada, the sledgehammer after colleges, which is, there's more colleges in rural areas than universities, and so where part of the negative impact is that a lot of Canada's rural economic development is going to be slowed because of this. So we're going to see a lot of pain in northern colleges in Ontario. We're going to see pain on the prairies in northern British Columbia. Again, because of a policy that came into place because of Vancouver and Southern Ontario that's going to negatively impact the rest of the country.
I mean, I can't think this is a surprise. Like, it would seem to me that this would be the understood impact from the start. But is that a wrong?
So I agree with you. We have a lot of smart people working for IRCC, helping recommend policy. Our politicians are smart people too, even if they act in ways that doesn't make it appear so. We do know though that our politicians have a history of ignoring the smart advice from civil servants. For example, there's quite famously in I think 2021 or 2022, the government decided in order to deal with a visa backlog, they just were going to stop reviewing several requirements for visa applicants for around the world, which is a huge reason for our spiking asylum claims. And IRCC told the Minister of Immigration that this would happen, but the politicians decided to do it anyway. So because they have the power to ignore the advice of the smart people who work for the government. So I don't know what kind of advice was given. I also do see that this is political. This is a fight across provincial and federal jurisdictions. There was in late 2023 significant talk between the provinces and the federal government about making changes to the international student program. There has been, I will be one of the most vocal advocates that the provincial governments have declined to take any responsibility for quality control over designated learning institutions. And my belief is that because the federal government couldn't make any kind of agreement with the Ontario provincial government, that the federal government just said, fine, we'll just do it the hard way. And I think if our provincial and federal governments were better at speaking to each other, if they knew how to get along on the playground, then I think we could have had better policy outcomes. Daniel Smith in Alberta, which is could be another podcast too, the way we see that fight play out on immigration between her and Mark Miller at times.
I'm from a very rural background, and so when you talk about Brandon, Manitoba, and rural area, the area that I come from actually, I don't know if I think it's a formal strategy, and to they'd love to have international students come down and settle there, and they'll help them start businesses, they'll help them find places to live. I mean,
just on a personal note, I think about this because I've decided to make both my personal and professional life focused on migration. I'm doing this podcast from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I've been here just over a year, and even though I'm from a rural area in Canada, I came to the capital city in this country. Sure, I'd been here on vacation, so I knew what I was getting myself into, but I can't imagine moving to rural Argentina, showing up, not having the language abilities, not having the
yeah,
personal support network. But after a year of living in Buenos Aires, now I can imagine taking the next step to move out to a rural place.
yeah,
And I think the next step I would love to see in Canada's policies are trying to think, okay, so you came to Toronto, you came to the Greater Toronto area, Vancouver area. How can we entice you to move to rural areas where there is housing, where there are jobs? We need more people. We need more helping hands. I think we have a lot questions of a lot of former international students that are disappointed that they will not be able. There's no capacity in the annual targets for them to get permanent residence. Well, what if we had a national retraining program in healthcare or skilled trades for these people who want to stay in Canada but don't currently qualify? I don't know how much that would cost. I don't know how that would be delivered. There's a business side to figure that out as well, but I think if we started to work together more on our problems, I think we might be able to find better solutions. I think we've spent a year. There's been a year or more of anger in Canada and criticism and and policy change and fighting. I really hope in 2025. I'm not optimistic about it, but I would love to see in 2025 we start say, okay, things are broken now. How do we come together, fix them? How can we find creative solutions that bring our partners together? How do we find a business model for Northern Ontario colleges that is viable while also addressing regional economic development and our immigration challenges?
the community that I come from, what I would call a city, 40,000. And then there's all these small sort of communities around it where I grew up. And I was talking with them, and one of the things they said is they created all these different cultural organizations so that people coming from different backgrounds would, okay, well, I can be a part of this, and that the immigrant population that was coming, they would, for about 2 weeks, go to those, whatever, let's say a meeting, let's say a dinner. After about 2 3 weeks, they didn't want to be in that. They wanted to be in whatever, the Chamber of Commerce, Rotary. uh they didn't want to be separated. But I think your point about how do we encourage people to move to different areas, whether it's northern, rural, remote. I grew up with a father who was from way up north, and he always used to say to us, my sister and me, "Listen, David, what you need to do is you need to go north." Like he just believed, you want to move up faster, you want more opportunities. It's not everywhere in the north, but you know what? There's real opportunity there. And yeah, okay, maybe it's not exactly whatever, the temperatures, it's colder or it's smaller or whatever. But he would always say, go north, go north, go north, get out of the big city, go where the opportunity is, get your foot in the door, and you're going to find that people will, in these communities, if you willingly come there because there's good stuff, they will embrace you. They will very much value the fact that you made the choice to go to there. And that's something that I talk about with our
I
students.
could talk plenty with thoughts about integration, which is, I think, not enough of a part of our conversation about immigration. Um,
Okay.
and newcomer success, because it is, I think, I talk to clients in big cities in Canada who are lonely and are having trouble socially integrating, and I share strategies with them because I'm like, I'm new in Buenos Aires, I'm having the same challenges, and I also don't want to be hanging with other foreigners. I want to meet Argentinians, and it's
Yeah.
so I can absolutely relate to these conversations, but I think this is where we're called back to where we're talking about. I fully believe colleges and universities are one of the best. I do believe they are one of the best settlement services for even for Canadians like myself. I moved from my village of 400 people, 100 kilometers to Brandon, where I built a community.
Yeah.
That was, and the university provided that opportunity. In the same way, colleges and universities are ideal places for providing integration for newcomers, for future permanent residents, for international students, when done well.
Mm. And I would say to that, and I know by integration you mean not saying don't don't have your observe your culture, your background, but let's bring it together
Yeah.
more. And I learn about you, you learn about me. Yeah, no, I agree 100% with that. And I think that goes down. I'm a big believer of the school is the community is the school. And the more that you can bring everything, the blur the line, that's going to be better for the institution, for the students, for the community members. All right, I know that you've lived internationally extensively, Buenos Aires now. How is what Canada is doing compare to some other countries which are have been destination countries for international students? Is there are there a few examples you can give there?
So I would say that the most similar countries to look at would be the UK and Australia. So the UK has been ahead of Canada in making a mess out of their international student programs and creating uncertainty for anyone who wants to
So we're
study.
not alone. We're not
No,
alone.
UK has led with the example, and one of the ways they do that is decreasing work rights, especially for spouses. So we that's one of the policies that is coming in Canada, amongst the many, is the idea that if you like what what 35-year-old, 30-year-old, what married person wants to move to a new country without their spouse, or wants to move to another country and have their spouse sit at home all day without
Yeah,
being able to work. And so when you
yeah,
remove the working rights for the spouse, you really decrease the incentives for international education in the destination country. So the UK did that. That's one of the things Canada has done. Australia was looking at an international student cap as well. And it looked like it was going to go through, but ultimately it was rejected because maybe Canada, they saw Canada's example and they said, are you fools? Do you want to destroy one of the major parts of the Australian economy? And so they ultimately rejected the international student cap.
well, at least we're helping others. I'm joking, and I'm joking about something that is actually very serious. You work predominantly with the graduates. Is there anything you would add in terms of trends that you're seeing with your clients who are graduates of these programs who came in on student visas? What are they saying? What are you seeing?
They're worried, and they also feel they they're worried about their future prospects in Canada, and they are feeling very unwelcome. They're feeling that when that that Canada that they're no longer welcome in Canada, and it's I think that's a heavy thing to carry, living in a country and feeling like you are not wanted. There, most of them are persisting, but I think that feeling of rejection is, I think we have not really talked about what that does for what we call retention or future contributions. So imagine some of our most talented international student graduates who now maybe they'll get permanent residence, and then after 5 years they'll say, you know what, this country doesn't treat me very well. I'm gonna take my talent elsewhere. And we have a significant problem of Canada's most talented people leaving the country, both Canadian-born and newcomers. The Institute for Canadian Citizenship released a report in November called The Leaky Bucket about the number of newcomers who leave Canada within 5 years after arrival. It's 1 in 5, I believe, leave. So we talk, there's been a lot of talk about the numbers of new people coming into Canada, but we're not talking about the people who leave.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So there's a big talent loss, a big loss of tax dollars as well.
Yeah, and these students have come to our institutions, and yes, they're paying significant fees, but at good schools that are ethical, they're putting resources into trying to offer quality programming, with the hopes, I think, that the international students will stay.
I think we're going to see some big changes in. I hope we'll see that the colleges and universities will use this as an opportunity to differentiate, to specialize, to really find what they're really good at. We know certain Waterloo's famous for this.
Right.
Sheridan College is known for like musical theater and animation, as Ontario examples. So we need I think some kind of general institutions that serve the regional population, like Brandon University, and where I went. I'm not expecting it to become the specialist in it needs to be a bit of a generalist to serve the local population. At the same time that it can be a specialist in music education and rural economic development, for example.
I have said before, and it's not this simple. I know it's not this simple. Because schools were placed regionally and in different places for reasons. Okay, but we talked a little bit about my experience in the United States education system, and what that taught me, or what I observed there, and which I think we all, whether we're in education or we're not in education, but we're talking about education, is sitting back and saying, like, really digging deep. What do we do really, really well? What do we do really well that we already do? And then what could we do really well with, a little bit more? Who wants that? Who really wants that? Who wants what we're selling, and willing to pay for it? And of course, there's so many segments of students now. And what do they value? And then where are they? And go get them, bring them back. We can't offer the full menu of programs at every institution. Not that every institution does, but really, really focusing on, this is what we're about. This is our differentiated value proposition, and also looking at, again, things that are already in play and revisiting them. You don't necessarily have to entirely reinvent the wheel. Just think about sort of already some of the things you do and what you do well. And it's more complicated than that, I know, but
I think part of it, it's actually a paradigm shift. I think you mentioned, because you studied in the U.S. and the U.S. has a very different paradigm on education.
Yes.
Business of education is well established in the United States in a way that I remember when I first heard the term business while working in an educational institution, I felt uncomfortable because I said, I'm here for education, not for business. But there has been a growing shift. We've seen the businessification of, or maybe it's finally clear that colleges and universities in Canada are businesses. They are not public institutions anymore. They're barely publicly funded, and so they do have to start thinking more like businesses if they are going to stay alive, because the public has decided they don't want to pay for them.
I don't think it's a bad thing for education to say, yeah, we're in business. Yeah, we're in business. We're nonprofit. And yes, we get public funds, but yeah, there is a business part of this. I personally don't see the issue with that. It doesn't mean all of a sudden that you get rid of whatever type of programs and you're only focusing on commerce. That's not how I interpret. So I end each session with a question. If, say, a university president or a group came to you of universities and colleges and they said, you know what you're doing, you're a smart guy, what are two pieces of strategic advice you would give us?
The universities and colleges?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to tell them to in turn, if we're thinking about international student enrollment, especially, is I think they need to lobby the federal government for a more clear pathway from international student to permanent resident. I think we need to get honest with ourselves that many international students choose Canada for the opportunity of a more stable and economically secure life, a safer country to live in. Many people are not coming to they're not coming to many of the Canada's educational institutions because they are world-renowned institutions. That does not mean they do not have a great quality of education, but they're not spending so much money and moving halfway across the world to do some of these or to study culinary management, for example. So I think we need to be honest that people are looking to Canada, and when they come to study, they are thinking about building a long-term future in Canada, and we need to provide a clearer pathway in order to make that happen. This does not have to be a promise that everyone who studies in Canada becomes a permanent resident, because that cheapens, I think, our education, and then there may not be a motivation to strive. It's still good to have these carrots to achieve one's best and to contribute the most to Canada. But I think part of what the breakdown that has happened in Canada's education and immigration systems is what we call the funnel, or what I call a funnel, of the number of temporary residents and international students in Canada trying to compete for a very small number of permanent residence spaces. So it just became, there's not room for all of them, and it became unpredictable. And if we want to continue to have our cake and eat it too, where our immigration system is integrated into our college and university system, we need to introduce more predictability, not take that away. So I would tell those colleges and universities to say, fine, Minister Miller, if you want to be in charge of education in Canada, then we need some more
We need a constitutional amendment.
Yeah. But we need so if these colleges are now effectively going to be reshaping their program offerings so that they can continue to attract international students. And so they're cutting business programs and trying to figure out how they can run these more expensive programs in engineering and healthcare and skilled trades, which are underfunded by the province. So they're trying to figure out how to make business sense out of all of this. And if they're going to redesign their institutions according to this, I think they deserve to have some predictability in the process. And I think national students deserve some predictability as well if they are investing very significant amounts of money into their studies, and very significant amounts of time away from their family and their home country, their home cultures, to give a shot on Canada. And we should not take for granted that people choose Canada, because if we continue acting like this, people will stop choosing Canada, and we will have a very different set of problems of our aging society. And we already can't pay for healthcare and education. I don't know how we're going to pay for it 20 years from now if we stop the flow of immigrants.
Yeah, and there's a whole series of discussions there about historically immigrants being the entrepreneurial class in Canada. I mean, it's just true. I think we'll call it there. Not sure what time it is in Buenos Aires, but anyway,
on a Saturday, I still have time to go for a nice long walk before it's dark. So
wonderful.
Inviting me and spend part of Saturday afternoon with you, David. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope we can touch base back with you here and there, maybe as further developments will, I think, without question, come up. And it's this is central to Canadian education. It's not going away, and so we need to, as you said, we need some predictability. We need some stability. So thank you very much for speaking with me. For those of you who are interested in this type of programming, please hit subscribe. Comments in the section below. Matthew's biography, a link to his website and business will be below as well. And Matthew, thank you very much for your generosity of time and expertise. And to all those watching, have a wonderful day. Thank you.